Hey everyone, this is Jake Munger. You are listening to the Zoologist Podcast. I hope you're ready. We've got a very exciting episode on tap for today. We're going to be learning more about some of the amazing creatures that inhabit our planet. We're going to be learning facts and hearing stories, all centered around animals, all centered around the animal kingdom. I hope you're as excited to go on this journey as I am. Now let's get ready to get wild. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for hopping on and listening to today's episode of the Zoologist Podcast. As of this episode's release, it is July 4th. I hope you're having a wonderful summer. And if you are a freedom-loving patriot, I hope you're having a happy 4th of July, American Independence Day. And in honor of the holiday, we have an American-themed episode on tap for today. We are going to be learning all about Yellowstone National Park. Yellowstone is an American icon. It's the nation's oldest national park, and it's one of the world's first protected wildernesses. What lies within its boundaries is absolutely spectacular. Over 2 million acres of untamed forest and grassland, complete with hydrothermal features, pristine bodies of water, beautiful scenery, and of course, some of North America's most famous wildlife. In this episode, we're going to learn more about this iconic park, from its history to its fascinating ecosystem, and explore some of the amazing animals that call it home. Let's dive in. Thank you once again so much for hopping on and listening to today's episode. I know I say that every week, but I realize that there are a lot of different things you could be doing this summer and probably are doing this summer, but you're taking time to sit down and listen to my show, and that really does mean a lot to me. So sincerely, thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for taking the time to learn a little bit more about animals. If you are a first-time listener to the show, first of all, welcome. If you enjoy what you hear today, please be sure to follow and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. I'm posting new content every week, new episodes released every Tuesday, all about animals, learning all about the animal kingdom, the many creatures that inhabit our planet. So be sure to follow and subscribe and never miss a new episode of the Ultimate Animal Podcast. Also, while you're perusing your favorite streaming platform, please be sure to leave a rating and a review. These ratings, they do two different things for me. One, they help the podcast get out to a wider audience, help it to reach more people. But more importantly, they help me to receive important feedback about the podcast, ways that I can improve the show and make it a better listening experience. And that's something that I'm always seeking to do. I want to make this as enjoyable to listen to as possible. So please be sure to leave a rating and review, whether it be on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I really would appreciate it. It does mean a lot to me. And with that, let's dive in to today's topic. I have had today's episode on my calendar for a while now. As soon as I found out I was going to be doing an episode on the 4th of July. I am an American, you might have guessed. To all you fellow Yankees out there, hope you have a great Independence Day. Hope you're able to enjoy it with friends and family. But to those of you who are not Americans, I wanted to choose a topic that, while it was American-themed, would have international appeal. It would be something that would be interesting for everyone to learn about. And so hopefully I've been able to do that with Yellowstone National Park. Yellowstone is a super cool topic. It's one of the oldest and most famous national parks in the entire world, and it's significant for several different reasons. Historically, it was America's first national park, and it really paved the way for a lot of other national parks to be established across the country, led to a lot of different protected wildernesses. Culturally, indigenous tribes have lived in and around Yellowstone for 11,000 years. There are 27 federally recognized tribes that have connections to the Yellowstone area. Geologically, Yellowstone sits atop one of the biggest volcanoes in the entire world. You probably heard something about this, but it's also home to almost 10,000 hydrothermal features, including over half of the world's active geysers. And then, of course, ecologically, Yellowstone is one of the best and largest remaining habitats for iconic North American wildlife such as grizzly bears, bison, moose, wolves, mountain lions. The list goes on and on. There are over 60 species of mammal living within Yellowstone National Park, almost 300 species of bird, and then several different species of fish, insects, reptiles, and amphibians. So Yellowstone has a lot going for it, and there's a lot to learn about Yellowstone National Park. And what we're going to do today is we're going to learn more about the park. We're going to go over a brief history of Yellowstone, how it came to be, and then, of course, because this is an animal podcast, we're going to be learning about the iconic wildlife that dwells within its boundaries, some of the amazing animals that call that ecosystem home. But first, as always, we're going to start with some background information. Just some basic information, some quick facts, I guess you could say. Yellowstone is located in the Rocky Mountain West region of the United States. It covers an area of about 3,400 square miles or 8,800 square kilometers across 3 different states. Portions of it spill into Montana and Idaho, but the vast majority, 96% of its area lies within the great state of Wyoming in the upper northwest corner of that state. Yellowstone is filled with absolutely beautiful landscape. I mean, when you think of classic American frontier landscape and wilderness, that's kind of what Yellowstone looks like. 80% of it is covered in forest. Most of that is coniferous. Of the remaining 20%, 15 is grassland and prairie, and then 5% of it is underwater. Yellowstone is famous for its beautiful bodies of water, including the Yellowstone Lake, which is the biggest high-elevation lake in the United States, and then the Yellowstone River. In addition to this, Yellowstone's landscape also has features such as mountains, canyons, cliffs, waterfalls, lots and lots of waterfalls, about 290 according to the National Park Service's website. And all of these work together to give Yellowstone one of the most beautiful landscapes in all of North America. I mean, just look up, when you get a chance, the Grand Canyon at Yellowstone, and you'll see what I mean. Absolutely spectacular vistas all over the park. But what Yellowstone is probably most known for is its volcanic activity. I would not be surprised if you've heard a lot about the Yellowstone volcano. It's one of the biggest in the world. And the reason that this volcano is there in the first place is because Yellowstone sits on top of an area that has been seismically active for tens of millions of years. And all that shifting of the Earth's tectonic plates has thinned the Earth's crust, and it's created this dome of magma called a hotspot, relatively close to the surface. And this hotspot has had several eruptions over the last few million years, the biggest of which was probably about 2.1 million years ago. It was one of the biggest eruptions in Earth's history, and then subsequent eruptions have occurred about 1.3 million and 640,000 years ago. Now, the magma that lies beneath Yellowstone still has an effect on the environment. It's the reason that Yellowstone has so many hydrothermal features, the features that it's so famous for. See, this magma, it heats rock that lies on top of it, which in turn heats groundwater that pools underneath the surface. Now, this groundwater is what creates these hydrothermal features. It's what leads to the creation of geysers, hot springs, as well as things like mud pots, which are like bubbling mud fields, and then fumaroles, which are vents that emit volcanic gas. In addition to this, volcanic activity in and around Yellowstone has produced a lot of obsidian, or volcanic glass. In fact, it's one of the reasons why this area has been so important to Native Americans for so long, because it's been an important source of this material, which they've used to make weapons and tools and other artifacts. In fact, you can still find arrowheads and other obsidian artifacts in and around Yellowstone National Park from Native American tribes that previously lived there. Alrighty, now let's answer the question, how exactly did Yellowstone become a national park? Well, that story begins with a man by the name of John Coulter. He was the first European to set eyes on the Yellowstone area. He was traveling with the Lewis and Clark expedition in 1806 when he left the party to join a group of fur trappers. Afterwards, he was traveling by himself when he came across later what he claimed was a land of fire and brimstone. It had boiling mud, steaming lakes and rivers, the whole shebang. It was absolutely crazy. Nobody believed him. We know now that it was probably some of the geothermal features over in the Yellowstone area, but at the time it sounded completely ludicrous. And that's more or less where things stood for the first 50, 60 years after that. people, mountain men, explorers, trappers would occasionally tell tales of geysers and whatever other features they might have come across in that part of the Rocky Mountain West, but in general, people didn't really believe them. It wasn't until the 1860s that organized expeditions began to be sent to the Yellowstone area, and a string of successful expeditions in 1869, 1870, and 1871 are ultimately what convinced Congress to protect the land and make it a national park. Now, there were a lot of key players in this movement to make Yellowstone a national park, and there were different reasons too. Some of them were environmental, but some of them were also practical. The land wasn't particularly good for settling, and so one man, Jay Cook, who had dealings with the railroad industry, wanted to make it a tourist destination because he thought it would be good for the railroad industry, and he recruited people to help him in his cause, financed expeditions, and lobbied Congress to protect that area. What ultimately pushed Congress over the edge, what helped convince them to protect the area, was an expedition by Ferdinand V. Hayden, a geological surveyor in 1871. What Hayden did was he actually brought Thomas Moran, a painter, and William Henry Jackson, a photographer, with him on the expedition and had them gather absolutely stunning images of the park. And it was these images that ultimately convinced Congress to put together the Yellowstone National Park Protection Act. That act was signed into law by President Ulysses S. Grant on March 1st, 1872. Now, the early years of the park were not all sunshine and roses. In fact, the park struggled early on because proponents of the park had believed that it could be run with no expense to the government, and so that's how it was run. The first superintendent, Nathaniel Langford, received no pay for his work, he received no funds, and he received no staff. That went about as well as you probably expect. Vandalism and poaching was rampant in the early years of the park, especially because people were not happy with the fact that they suddenly could not exploit natural resources from the area, and so they just did it anyway. Ultimately, Langford was pushed out in 1877, replaced by Philetus Norris, who was more successful. He received pay for his work, and he received minimal funds, which he used to build infrastructure within the park. But it wasn't until the U.S. Army took over in 1886, and additional legislation was passed during the 1890s and early 1900s, that poaching within the park began to die down. The National Park Service ultimately would take over for the Army in 1916, and ever since then, the infrastructure of Yellowstone, as well as the visitor numbers, have continued to rise throughout the years. Currently, Yellowstone receives about 3 million visitors every year, and they have received around that number for the past few decades. Alrighty, with that, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to learn more about the incredible wildlife that can be found within the boundaries of Yellowstone National Park. Don't go anywhere. Are you a brand new podcaster, hoping to share what you're passionate about to whoever's willing to listen, but you aren't sure where to start? Navigating the logistics of your podcast can be confusing, from tracking growth to getting your podcast on the biggest platforms like Apple and Spotify. That's why I use Captivate. Captivate is a podcast publishing site that's user-friendly and offers everything you need to fulfill your podcast's full potential. They'll help you publish your podcast to all of the most popular platforms, as well as help you track your growth through daily, weekly, 28, and 90-day download numbers, as well as the averages, so you can see where your podcast might be flourishing or floundering. What's more, they'll help you with promotion and advertising. They offer free courses on how to start and run the perfect podcast, and they even throw in a free website with your subscription, completely customizable to fit your podcast's personality. You can sign up now starting at $19 a month, and you'll even get a free 7-day trial so you can decide whether or not it's right for you. Sign up today at the.zoologist.net/captivate, and what's more, you'll be supporting my show. Captivate truly is a podcaster's best friend. Welcome back as we continue our discussion about Yellowstone National Park. So far, we've talked about the history of the park, kind of how it came to be, and we've also gone over some background information, some fast facts about the area. And now we're going to get into the good stuff. We're going to learn more about the ecosystem and the animals that live in and around Yellowstone National Park. The thing is that Yellowstone is just a portion of a much larger ecosystem, one that covers tens of thousands of square mileage across 3 different states. According to every source that I saw, it is one of the biggest ecosystems in the northern temperate zone that remains mostly intact. Are you confused? Good. So was I. More understandably, it's one of the largest and best remaining habitats for megafauna left in North America. Megafauna is just big animals. That's all it is. This includes some of the most iconic species in all of North America. I'm talking about grizzly bears, mountain lions, wolves, elk, moose. But the most famous residents of Yellowstone National Park might be the bison herd. American bison are an icon in and of themselves. They are America's national mammal, and they are the biggest animals on the North American continent. Males can weigh up to 2,000 pounds, or almost 900 kilograms, or just over 900 kilograms, and they can be 6 feet tall, or 1.8 meters. Yellowstone provides an excellent habitat for bison with its alpine meadows and its prairies, which is a good thing because it's played a key role in bison conservation when their numbers have dwindled. You see, bison used to number in the tens of millions across North America. They could be found everywhere, and they were a staple of Native American culture both as a food source and because of their spiritual significance. However, overhunting and a campaign by the U.S. Army to remove Native Americans ultimately led to the bison almost going extinct in the late 1800s. By about 1902, there were only 24 bison left in Yellowstone National Park. What Yellowstone did was they purchased 21 bison from private ranches, and one thing led to another, and by 1954, their numbers had grown to more than 1,300. Conservation efforts had helped them increase their numbers to over 1,000. Yellowstone used to have a policy of culling animals when they felt like populations had grown too high, but they reversed this policy in 1969, and after this, bison numbers completely exploded. And pretty soon, Yellowstone had the opposite problem that it had back in the late 1800s. There were too many bison. You see, bison don't just stay in Yellowstone National Park. They wander in and out. And this brings them into conflict with ranchers who see them as competitors to their livestock. Not only that, bison potentially carry diseases that might be harmful to other cattle. And so it's brought Yellowstone into a lot of conflict with private ranchers and even entire U.S. states. The state of Montana even sued Yellowstone at one point for not keeping their bison within the confines of the national park. In response to this, Yellowstone has had to slaughter bison that have wandered outside park boundaries. In an effort to prevent this, they've introduced programs that have allowed bison to be transferred to other national parks, as well as be gifted to Native American tribes. Yellowstone's bison also come into conflict with people in other ways. More visitors to the park are attacked by bison than by any other animal. Just some statistics for you. Between 1978 and 1992, 56 people were injured by bison and 2 were killed. Between 2000 and 2015, 25 people were injured by bison. If you've seen videos online or if you've just been to Yellowstone National Park, you'll know that a lot of this is people's faults. People have a tendency to just walk up to these things, which is very, very not smart. Don't do that. If you visit Yellowstone National Park, do not wander close to animals. These are wild creatures. They don't want you walking up to them, no matter how gentle or friendly they may seem. In fact, Yellowstone even has a rule that you have to stay at least 25 yards away from bison and elk at all times. Now, according to the National Park Service's website, you can tell when these animals feel threatened or when they want you to move away. They might bluff charge, they might bob their head, they may paw the ground, they might bellow, they might snort. They might do any of these things if they think that you're too close. So if you see any of these warning signs, even if you're in that 25-yard limit, it's probably best to move away. Now, while bison might be the most famous herbivores living in Yellowstone National Park, they aren't the only ones. The park has a number of other herbivore species like mule deer, pronghorn, even moose can be found within the park's boundaries. The most abundant large animal living in Yellowstone National Park are the elk. Elk during the summer months can number between 10,000 and 20,000 individuals just within Yellowstone National Park. In the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, they can reach population numbers of about 40,000. Now, such a large animal in such large numbers is naturally going to have an impact on the environment that they live, and elk do. In the past, elk overpopulation has been a big problem in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, but recent efforts to increase carnivore populations have helped with that immensely. In the past, carnivores were hunted in many cases to extinction within the area because they were seen as a threat to local wildlife. This includes bears, mountain lions, and most notably wolves. Wolves went extinct in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem in 1926. They were reintroduced to the area in 1995, and since then their numbers have grown to between 300 and 330. They have been key in keeping elk populations in check. They've stabilized the ecosystem, and they've actually even created more resilient elk herds because they're not just left to their own devices. I could probably do a whole episode just on wolves within Yellowstone National Park, and I probably will at some point. But suffice to say for now that it seems by all accounts that reintroducing them into the area has gone well. However, they are not the most famous carnivores living within Yellowstone National Park. That title probably belongs to the bears. There are two different bear species that can be found within Yellowstone. Black bears, which are more common, and grizzly bears. Yellowstone, the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, is one of the few places in the lower 48 states that grizzly bears can still be found. Now, what's interesting is that from 1910 to about 1960, in Yellowstone National Park, parkgoers were allowed and even in some cases encouraged to feed bears that they came across. This has been reversed. It was reversed in 1960, and for good reason. Feeding wild animals is a very, very bad idea, and it caused bears to get more bold. It led to increases in bear attacks. Today, the rule is that parkgoers are expected to stay at least 100 yards away from bears and wolves, and for good reason, because these animals, while absolutely magnificent, can be dangerous. Alrighty, there is one last animal that I want to talk about today before we conclude. I feel like I can't do an American-themed episode without talking about the bald eagle. The bald eagle probably deserves its own episode someday, but for now, suffice to say that these birds became America's national symbol in 1782. By the 1960s, they were almost extinct, but conservation efforts were made and they were taken off the endangered species list in 2007. In Yellowstone National Park, they're one of more than a dozen different birds of prey in the park. It's not known exactly how many live within the confines of Yellowstone, but it's believed to be somewhere around 28. Alrighty, and that should just about do it for today's episode about Yellowstone National Park. Hopefully you've enjoyed learning more about America's oldest and most famous national park. There are so many different animals that we could talk about when it comes to Yellowstone. There are so many different creatures, so much wildlife that lives there. And honestly, there's beyond even just wildlife, there's so many topics, so many things to explore about Yellowstone National Park. For now, I think it's enough to say that Yellowstone is one of the most iconic national parks in the world for a reason. It has beautiful scenery, it has historic and cultural significance, and of course, it has some of the greatest wildlife on the entire continent of North America and some of the most beautiful animals in the entire world. So if you ever get a chance to visit Yellowstone, first of all, I envy you, but also just take it in and enjoy every moment because you are in one of the last true wildernesses left in the United States. Thank you once again so much for hopping on and listening to today's episode of the Zoologist Podcast. Hopefully you had a great time learning more about this incredible national park and the incredible animals that live within its boundaries, the history of the park, how it came to be. If you would like to learn even more about Yellowstone and some of the amazing animals that live within its boundaries, go ahead and check out the research links I'll be putting in the description. These are some of the sites, some of the articles that I used to put together today's episode, so go ahead and check those out if you get a chance. Also, if you have any ideas for episodes, animals, or topics that you'd like to learn more about, please be sure to reach out to me. You can reach out via Twitter at the.zoologist.net/Twitter. You can also reach out via email at the.zoologist.podcast@gmail.com. Alrighty, thank you once again so much for hopping on and listening. Have a great rest of your week, have a wonderful holiday, and as always, have a wild day.